So I had a topic for discussion today,
Okay.
which is we've been talking about the Digital Operational Resilience Act, and Bob, you mentioned there's a US rule about cybersecurity,
hmm
um, and I just seen another one coming through at the moment. So this concept of regulators and governments saying that we need to be more secure is now a pattern that's not going away.
Yeah.
And the one that I saw recently said you need to be able to resolve an issue in 3 weeks. So this is the first time that this is like security issues. This is the first time that we can now put a number on it of what is an acceptable amount of time for you to fix a security issue. Right. So everyone who does not have a change lead time of 3 weeks right now needs to start working out how they're going to get a change lead time of 3 weeks, right? And this is like you're going to have to start getting into the habit of deploying more than monthly, because otherwise you'll be trying to do that in an emergency and expediting and causing yourself problems. So I thought this is an interesting subject, right? Because
This, yeah.
these laws, it's not going to get longer than 3 weeks now. It's going to eventually tighten up, right?
Is it is it any security issue? Like even if
Um,
it's rated as low or
I imagine there are caveats and constraints around it. I think I've got about 40 pages of legislation to read to fully understand this one. It's landed in my inbox today. Um,
where is this coming from? Is this coming from the UK or the US?
Who did
uh,
this?
What sort of insanity is this?
this is let me find the doco so that I can give people the title and they can go and read the small print. So this probably won't surprise people. It's Europe, the EU.
Ah,
Oh,
And
yep.
it's part of their big cyber resilience drive. Um, uh, so, so yeah, it's kind of it does relate to the existing rules, but this 3 week numbers cropped up, and they've got like they've filled this with numbers, right? It's like uh, there's 265 billion US dollars of impact from these attacks, right? So they're trying to do something about this, not just because like we're losing that money. I did wonder where my $256 billion had gone. Um,
Yeah.
but also because that money then gets used for purposes that defeat democracy and safety as well, right? Because it's funding bad things. So,
hmm.
yeah.
That's
It like everything it starts with a good intention. And I agree you shouldn't have security issues, but the practicality of saying it's going to be has to be fixed within 3 weeks. Not all security issues are created equal. Sometimes it's a simple matter of I just need to update a third party to the latest version. Not a big deal. Takes me a couple minutes, run the appropriate tests, nothing blows up, happy days. But then there's going to also be the ones that are like it's like a could be like a run condition or some sort of race condition that's almost impossible to track down. And you could spend weeks if not months, trying to track it down, figure out how on earth did it exactly happen inside of your code base, trying to reproduce it and also
Mm.
trying to fix it. Even worse than that is I'm sure you've heard about the kerfuffle that happened with Microsoft, where they pushed out a security patch and it ended up causing all kinds of issues with certain NVMe drives where they would suddenly become unmountable or they would stop being viewable by Windows and you'd hopefully if you restarted it would come back up. Myself, I was actually impacted by that while I was on vacation where I restarted and I got back a unmountable boot drive. And no matter how many times I restarted, I got that same thing and I basically had to recreate Windows from scratch. So, but that was something like that was caused by a security fix. So, in the rush to get security fixes out there by this arbitrary timeline, you're going to end up in a situation where you're probably going to make things worse because you maybe fully didn't vet it or you fully weren't able to reproduce it or any number of those different types of things.
That's
hmm.
kind of the crucial point, right?
Yeah.
If your route to fix security issues is the expedite lane, that's the kind of result that you get because when if you don't have the muscle to deploy frequently, and you have something that you need to fix urgently, the expedite lane just means skipping around things that are necessary, right? And that's what I think is interesting because there is high variability on trying to determine a security fix. So the way to counter that is to have a very predictable deployment pipeline,
Yeah.
so that you're not adding more variability onto an already fraught situation.
It comes back to it's also and in my mind it's also a little bit of it's a lot like rollback plans. Uh, Oftentimes rollback plans are never executed until the absolute worst case when you actually do need to do a rollback. And if you haven't built up that muscle memory, a lot of times you're making it up as you go along. And same thing, if you're doing these security fixes, it just ad hoc or as fast as you possibly can, back to your point, you don't want to, this is not the time when you want to make something up as you go. This is when you want to have a very like, hey, I've already built this muscle up. It's really a non-event. Oh, we just got to push a security fix in. It's part of a normal workflow. It's not a, oh my gosh, everything is on fire type of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd
And the
say
clock
it's
the
like a
clock's
dodgeball
running.
match. Sorry, Tony.
I was just saying, yeah, and what Bob said, plus, and now the clock's running. It's like there's the
Yes.
Yeah.
3 week window. It's like even more pressure.
Yeah, and it's like a dodgeball game when you're down, you're the last player on your team. What you don't need at that moment is your other teammates to start telling you what you should be doing,
Yeah.
because then you're just being distracted and then you get hit and then that's it, game over, right? So it's like you just want to make sure that like you if you have got the practice of we have a small change and we can deploy that and this is a very short time window, but it's always the same things happen in the same way, that takes a huge amount of pressure off of those like
Yeah.
scary moments. Whether it's like a real critical bug fix that you need to get out, or a security patch, or just the next small bit of code that you're changing for normal reasons, right? We don't want to have different lanes for this stuff. And like, if that means skipping things that are keeping us safe. So,
Mm.
I I also think about when we talk about the stress level that happens with a security, especially if it's a critical security bug, you want to fix it because depending on the application you're working on, that's it could be absolutely critical, uh, you know, critical to either to the business or critical to your users or any number of those things. And shift gears slightly and talk a little bit about human responses. I'll use a really bad example. So years and years and years ago, I went paintballing for the very first time, and I was so jacked up on adrenaline. Like I ran full speed into a wall because I wanted to, get undercover. And then not only that, I was shooting way over the people's heads, with the paintballs. And same thing happens when I was on call for the very first time. First time I got a page, I got jacked up on adrenaline. And I can't say I was making the most rational decisions because it was kind of this flight or fight response that happens with that. And again, if you don't have this predictable thing where it's happening regularly and you lower the stress level and you allow yourself the chance to breathe and give yourself this capability to have this natural way of doing it, then that's when you also make mistakes as well. And sometimes you can make it even worse on something like that. Um, I won't lie, if I ever hear the BlackBerry ringtone for text message, that default ringtone, I still get an adrenaline boost. I'm ready to fight a bear. Like because I was so used to being woken up in the middle of the night with that ringtone. I'm like, all right, what's going on? That type of thing. So I mean, like when you have this thing happen enough, you start kind of building up this kind of you know, natural response to all of that. And if it's a big deal, then yeah, absolutely, it's going to make you. That's my other fear is you could end up causing more mistakes.
I was
I
using
couldn't.
PagerDuty once, and PagerDuty had a setting in the app where you could just tick a box and it said override default sound, right? So it would just
Oh,
override the system sound. And I got paged at 1 a.m. at full volume, and I thought I was going to die because it was so loud. And after that, I just unticked it again and just set a volume.
yeah. I Well, that's the only. So when I was doing on call stuff, especially when I was on call rotation, the worst on call rotation, it was every 4 weeks, and it only happened when jobs failed, and all the jobs ran between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. So I was always getting paged at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., getting just shot out of bed like a rocket. You know?
I couldn't help but visualize, Bob, when you were telling your previous story that when you said your first page come in, I was in my mind hoping you were going to say you get up and just ran into a wall.
I I might have stumbled into a wall because I'm like, what's going
Yeah,
on?
yeah.
My poor
Uh,
dog was so confused during that time. I was like, is it time for walks? No.
not now. Yeah. Uh, it's it even it's going and sort of zooming back, I suppose, to the regulation. But there's just so many parts of it. It'll be interesting to read it and go through the data. But like, how do you even define what a security? How broad is that, or how narrow is it, or how do they track it? What happens if you don't sort of action it within those 3 weeks? I
Yeah.
don't know if there's anything in that early bit that you've read, Steve, to sort of nod towards any of those things, but it just it seems like such a broad brushstroke. It's like,
Yes. So credit where it's due. European legislation is usually pretty good. One of the things that they absolutely nail is it's very clearly written. So
hmm,
you can open it up and you can read it. They do have classifications in here. So they're talking about even classifications of products, whether you have a critical product or a non-critical product. So, if you have some utility that you use inside your building and it's got like a vulnerable dependency, it's probably not going to apply to that. But if you're a bank and it's your banking app that your customers have installed on their phone, it is going to apply to that. So the same as these other regulations, they are looking at industries, they are being pragmatic about a lot of stuff. So I'm sure when we get into the details, there's going to be um, lots of conditions around what this does and doesn't apply to.
hmm,
But it's interesting in real life, those critical applications are often the ones that are overburdened in the deployment pipeline with manual approvals and
Yep.
change approval boards and all the things that are going to slow it down. So in a way, this is almost like the little crowbar that will start us moving this big rock in a lot of places of actually the lowest risk comes from small batches, regular deployments, practicing things a lot so that they get very slick and good.
hmm.
Yeah, I mean that's honestly that's the only way to get better at it. And uh you're gonna have to um, go through and say, how can we ruthlessly remove these not unnecessary, but these manual steps and replace them with something that's either automated or remove things to be earlier in the pipeline. It's going to be kind of, oftentimes it's the forcing function that you need to make the change because, sometimes you just don't realize there's a problem until someone says you have to do something. I worked at a job as a developer and the pipeline that we had, the deployment pipeline we had, just some manual bits, it was okay. But then we had this big company initiative that came out and said that we basically have to update all of our applications because we're acquiring another company and it has to be done by this date. And if it's not done by this date, heads will roll type of thing. So it was kind of like this come hell or high water, we're going to make this date. And it was pragmatic. It wasn't like next week. It was 10 months in advance. But we were looking at it like we're going to have to do a lot of deployments, like a lot of these
Hmm.
deployments. And we're gonna have to fix this problem because if we don't fix this problem, well, we're gonna have a lot of late nights and it's just not gonna be a sustainable pace. And we're gonna have a lot of people burning out.
Yep.
I
I
think it's a
think
classic
it'll be.
problem that it's really hard to find the time to do the activities that really give you time back.
Yeah.
And automation is such a classic example of that. I know we joke that, like, why do a task in 5 minutes when you can spend a week automating it is like a classic joke because Some developers do love just reaching for automation straight away. And hello, it's me.
Yeah.
But uh, if you are going to run something every week for the next 5 years and you spend a couple of days automating it, right? You're gonna make that time back, not just in the toil time of you doing it, but the fact that it will be done right every single time. It's like a repeatable process. It
Yeah.
just, yeah. I don't know why we don't automate more stuff because I feel better every time I do something.
I do want to go back to that legislation just a little bit. I will give a bit of a hat tip to the EU because, again, when they write a lot of their regulations, they tend to be pragmatic, but at the same time, they also seem to be very open to feedback from the industry. So it's not this, you shall do this without any sort of like knowledge. You don't have a bunch of non-experts making these types of decisions. Uh, I also think it's because, sorry, when you look at the polar opposite, when you just make these arbitrary laws and you don't really listen to feedback, sometimes you're trying to solve a problem that no longer exists or has been mitigated. I think a really classic example for me is if you look at some of the Canadian laws and some of the resiliency laws, and like they need to be in two different cloud providers. I remember we're talking to some Canadian companies, and it's like, well, we have to be like in GCP and Azure, or Azure and AWS, or GCP and AWS, and you're just like, that's adds so much additional burden on top of what's necessary. And like, well, the answer is, what happens if one of the regions goes down? It's like, but cloud providers have been solving this with availability zones. So it's no longer just a region is no longer just a single data center. A region is multiple data centers within 100 kilometers of one another, and the chance of all of them going down at the same time. I mean, you're talking a pretty major catastrophe at that particular point in time. And so again, it's like the regulation, it really no longer reflects the real world at times.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that's interesting that um very often we bring over some stuff that applied from olden times. Like it's entirely possible that someone who used to manage like in-house like server rooms
Yeah,
has faced these problems. You know, like it's very possible that you can have two server rooms opposite sides of the street in two different buildings, but then there's a local grid problem and both of them can be taken out. So now they're like, well, how many kilometers do there need to be for the second site to be useful? And so that's where all that was developed from. But yeah, you would hope if you use cloud and you kind of look at the availability groups and the regions and you'd hope that that would be reasonable. And I think we found, haven't we seen recently that when there is a problem that affects that, kind of everything is gone for that day. Like people can't
yeah,
even complain about it on social media because that's not available right now.
yeah. If you lose an entire, honestly, if you lose an entire region, um, that's a massive deal these days. This is, I mean, you hear about it. I remember back in, you know, 8, 10 years ago when US East 1, that seemed to be the one that always went down for AWS. When that would go down, Netflix would go down. And so naturally, Netflix built additional resiliency into their application, as well as AWS. They built additional resiliency into their regions to avoid that type of scenario. I think the other thing that people also don't realize is that if a region goes down, almost immediately everyone's going to go to all of the other regions to try to bring their applications back up, and then you end up with these like CPU restrictions, like, oh, we don't have enough CPUs to spin up virtual machines, or we can't spin this up fast enough, or it takes forever to do it. uh, I think that's one of the downsides of Azure is with the region pairs. If one of the regions goes down, everyone's going to immediately go to the pair that's in that region and try to bring their system back up, and it's going to take even longer.
Yeah.
So again, it's but again, they're building resiliency in a good way to solve these problems and prevent that from happening to begin with by having these different like availability zones and everything like that. So these problems that happened 5, 10, 15 years ago, it's not happening as often today. And if it does happen, they're looking at, okay, what caused this, and let's prevent this from ever happening again.
Hmm. I think it's probably an interesting thing to watch in the coming years around this regulation specifically. Let's say it's in Europe, if you can filter things like the DORA report by industry, by
Mm-hmm.
region, and you kind of like, okay, here's where the regulations kicked in, here's the industries we know that it mostly applies to, and like, what does that do to things in terms of their like DORA metrics and stuff? And hopefully it's a change for good, but it would be interesting to sort of level that on top and just see where did they go sort of post that. Did the change happen that to yes to meet the regulation, but hey, look at the positive knock on as well that that could have.
That's an interesting point when you think about it, because there's always been these times in history where there's been this kind of negative pressure that gets put down on top of an industry, such as these types of regulations, and you can see hopefully an immeasurable impact on it. But then you also see a situation where there's kind of a positive impact. Uh, for example, I just finished reading a book called "Where the Wizards Stay Up Late," and it was about the founding of the internet and how, DARPA or ARPA at the time was just giving money away for all of these different computer research projects. And essentially the whole concept of the ARPANET, it was a 15-20 minute proposal, and the guy got approval from his boss, for $1 million to build, start building out the initial nodes and start working through all the different problems. And when you have this kind of like funding for funding's sakes, you also get the positive pressure and can kind of see it go up. So
Mhm.
it's very interesting to see, when governments, the levers they can pull to cause certain things to occur, either good or bad on something like that.
Sure. Yeah. There's also a fantastic book title.
Yeah,
It's like it just intrigues you in immediately. Yeah.
it was very fascinating to understand some of the problems that they had to solve. I mean, because you have to understand that none of the protocols that we know about that existed, Telnet, TCP/IP, they had to build that all from scratch. How do you communicate across vast distances?
Mhm.
And how do you have machines that were made by IBM talk to machines that were made by DEC?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, final thoughts for today. What is your favorite regulation? Mine is ISO 27001.
Hmm.
Mm.
I, you know, I'll go with I like the supply chain security one that came out. It's not really a regulation, but it was the executive order where they started talking about adding S-bombs and attestations and kind of getting this better understanding of how, or like the ingredients to go into making your cake, so to speak. Um, but I like it, and at the same time, I understand the problems that it causes. So it's definitely a love-hate type of relationship.
Mhm.
Tony, do you
I
have a
don't know if
favorite standard or regulation?
I don't know if I have. I don't know if I know enough to give you one. I'm gonna say Dora just because it confused the life out of me for a month. It was like, what is this? Is this the Dora metrics we've been talking about? It's like, no, it's not. So yeah, because I had to go and have a look and see what it was. That's probably the one I've double clicked on a little bit more than most.
Yes, and the line note on that is that it's the Operational Resilience Act, not the artist formerly known as DevOps Research and Assessment, who are now just known as Dora, and not the Cartoon Explorer.
Oh yeah,
Indeed. A trio of Doris. What a way to finish.
what a way to finish. Alrighty,
Yeah,
have a good one.
cool. Thanks,
Thanks very
everybody.
much.
Thank you.
Talk soon. Bye bye.
Bye.